Hello, everybody. Welcome to part one of our winery hygiene class. This is our short course, and I want to kind of go through the importance of winery cleanliness. So basically, the big definition is, cleaning, and we want to talk about what cleaning is and why that differs from sanitation. Why do we clean? And then, how do we clean in a winery? So our first definition we have to kind of define is really just simply winemaker, producer of wine, or a wine grower. One who utilizes yeast to decompose grapes into an alcoholic beverage. See, a glorified janitor. So what I want to get at here is that if any of you are of any illusion that winemaking is this glamorous, glorious thing that's beautiful people dancing in the vines and sipping dinner, sipping beautiful wines at dinner with gorgeous people all dressed in $1 million outfits and driving Rolls Royces, you're wrong. That's just not what it is. The fact of the matter is, what we are is, as wine growers, we are stewards of the land. First of all, we want to make sure that we grow beautiful grapes. Then we want to utilize yeast, who are our real winemakers. They're the ones that convert uh, sugar into alcohol that we all enjoy and make our wine from. But the reality is, at the end of the day, what winemakers do is we control our environment. And the primary way that we control our environment in the cellar is through winery cleanliness. So let's think about this really simple. Humans are very limited in what we're capable of seeing, touching, and feeling. One of the things that we can do is look at these beautiful grapes and think about the type of wine that we're going to produce from them. So on one side, we see this beautiful, Chardonnay that's a little bit golden. We can tell it's going to be ripe, pear, apricot, honeysuckle. Then on the right, we see this nice acidic Barbera, big, rich, juicy grapes that are going to make this, very berry, cherry, rich, red, wine. But this is what they look like to us. And humans really lack a deeper sense of much of anything. We don't have a very good sense of sight. We don't have a particularly good sense of smell. We're particularly limited in what we can see. And why that's important is when you look beyond the grapes, you have to sort of think about what, maybe microbes might see. And so microbes see things very differently than we do. They don't have the same perception that we do, and they work in a pretty simple way. And when we get down to fundamentally what grape juice is, it sort of looks like this. It's a big, fat, delicious pile of sugar. And the thing is that most microorganisms and humans, we're all born out of the same soup, and we utilize the same metabolism in a lot of different ways to produce different byproducts. Now, humans obviously are a much more complex organism, but we also work in conjunction with lots of microorganisms that process things. And as a result, humans are as much driven by the microflora inside of us as we are with our own brains, because the microflora inside of us outnumbers our brain cells and our human cells by maybe somewhere between 1,000 and 10,000 to 1. So if you think that you're really in charge, maybe it's your gut microflora that might be more so. And the reason why that's important is that humans crave sugar. We like sugar. It's something that we can utilize very rapidly for energy. We can convert it and store it into fat really readily. And humans, ideal, are actually fat storage devices. We want to pack on as much fat as we can because we never know when the famine's going to come. So we have to think about microbes being the same way. They're looking for a way to take all the sugar that they can and turn it into some sort of food source so that they can grow, have babies, and have a population, just like people do. So if you wanted to think of it in a little bit different way, like humans, this is what grape juice looks like. It's kind of an all-you-can-eat buffet. We have a giant pile of not only sugar, but then there's also amino acids. And what we want to do as winemakers is provide some sort of order that we can create an environment that is safe and clean for the microbes that we want to live in it. Because if you think about this buffet, if we just put it out in the wild, where there was no barriers to entry, where there was no cleaning, when it was all just food and we just had all the wild animals out there, they would descend on this and eat it pretty rapidly, whether it be humans, birds, different animals. It would be really quick. If you put these out in Walla Walla at night, you'd have a bunch of trash pandas, aka raccoons, devouring it in a few minutes. And so, very realistically, in the winery environment, we have the same scenario where we have outside microorganisms that are not yeast that want to come in and they want to consume all that sugar for themselves. And they would love to do nothing more than make sure that our yeast don't get an opportunity to live. And so Our yeast are very aggressive. They're big eaters. They like to consume. They're the most potent bunch of all the microorganisms. And yeast are particularly interesting because they create a byproduct that other microorganisms don't, and it's called alcohol. And alcohol, in and of itself, is a sanitizing agent. And why this is important is we want to make sure that our yeast have an opportunity to take hold, eat as much of that sugar as they can, and produce that alcohol. Because once we get to that 2, 3, 4% alcohol range, once that fermentation begins and our yeast have gotten ahead of the curve, alcohol works as a sterilant or a sanitizing agent to keep those other bad microbes away. And so, really, we want to make sure that we have everything in place, nice and clean, so that our yeast can come in, take advantage of all of that sugar, all those amino acids, all this wonderful, basically all you can eat buffet for yeast, and create alcohol for us so that we can keep those other bad actors away. So let's talk about cleaning. What is cleaning? Now, once we get past the philosophical piece of what we need to do, we need to physically and chemically remove food for those microorganisms that are going to want to live and eliminate a hospitable environment for their growth. So we want to get rid of that all you can eat buffet. Now, I'm not saying that in your fermentation itself, but if you think of your winery as a whole, and you think of the cellar as a whole, you think about places where grape juice ends up. So where does grape juice end up aside from where you want it? It ends up on the equipment. It ends up in pumps. It ends up in drains. It ends up on floors. It ends up a lot of places where you are not controlling that environment. Now, most tanks of fermenting, grapes have yeast going, so there's that alcohol being produced, and you have that sort of safety factor once you have fermentation going on. But when you think about what's happening all around where those ferments are happening, you have a lot of hot spots that are happening. So what we want to do is clean all that stuff up. We want to get rid of those food sources so that we can, as winemakers, keep our fermentation safe from a bad population of something growing over in a corner, down in a drain, that for whatever reason, when somebody walks by, puts their hand in it, touches it, and we don't want that to be introduced into another batch of wine. So why is cleaning so important? Well, first off, simple. It improves quality. I mean, the cleaner we are, the more focused we are on making sure that our wineries are clean and orderly and organized, we're going to have a better option of having high quality. We're also going to have much more consistency, and wine consistency is really important. You want your consumer to become comfortable with your product. They don't want to have a different wine every year. And if your winery is dirty, you're going to have different microflora, you're going to have different microbes that are going to take over your wine and create, an unpleasant flavor environment. So, we want to have consistency year in and year out, and cleaning is one of the most important things you can do to ensure that. We also talk about product safety. Product safety is going to become more and more important as we move forward. We've been able to get away for quite a long time in the wine industry with kind of running a ragtag, way of production, because we have that alcohol that we talk about that, very rarely would create any sort of an issue for a human pathogen. However, as time moves on, anything that people are going to consume are going to become under more and more federal regulation. This is something I've talked about since I started teaching in 2010. So over the last decade, we started saying that this was going to happen, and then it did happen. And so as time has gone on, we have seen this need to have our wineries be run more like a food processing plant. That means that we have to keep records of everything we do. So that product safety is not only going to be important for the consumer, but it's also going to be important that you can prove that your wine didn't have something in it somewhere along the line that could hurt someone, besides alcohol, which obviously can hurt people. And then we also can improve ageability without having any of those bad actors end up in our wine. We improve microbiological stability. Not too big of a deal for us, 14, 15% alcohol producing red wine people here in Walla Walla, because we've got high alcohol on our side. But if you work in a region elsewhere outside of Walla Walla, or some other big producing regions in the US where they're making lower alcohol wines that have sugar in it, you've got to be so much more careful. High alcohol red wines are very, very forgiving compared to, 7, 8, 9% alcohol white wine with some sugar in it. That's a very difficult place to be, and you've got to be that much cleaner. And then we also have to have protocols. We've got to have what's called SSOPs, sanitation, standard operating procedures, and you've got to have protocols. And the reason we have protocols are really simple. So we have it written down. We know what we're supposed to do. Your employees know what they're supposed to do. You reduce worry because you know it's getting done. You reduce chemical usage because you're using as much chemical as you're supposed to, as it says on the label. You reduce water usage because you're going to clean properly. And then also we reduce labor costs because everybody's on the same page. We're not doing the same thing twice. It's a much more efficient way of doing things. So let's talk about what a clean winery looks like to microorganisms. So rather than that all-you-can-eat buffet, you can never clean anything 100%. But our goal is to get rid of most of the starches, most of the sugars, most of the amino acids, and leave maybe a little bit behind that we can't completely get rid of because there's just no possible way to get a winery completely, totally clean. But the thing is that if you have an all-you-can-eat buffet, all sorts of things are going to descend on it. If you got a couple Brussels sprouts sitting on your back patio, they're probably going to end up sitting on your back patio. Nobody's going to end up coming and eating them. No raccoons are going to come out of the woodwork, nothing like that. So it doesn't take, you might get a caterpillar out of the deal, but that's about the worst thing you're going to see. But in a winery, we have to think about all of these different microbes that can come in and ruin our wine. So our idea here is to get the place as clean as we can and get rid of all of that sugar to the best of our ability. So, what is cleanliness? What does it mean? And how clean a winery is depends on a lot of things. And a lot of things we'll talk about is risk assessment. So, in some wineries, they actually don't clean at all. In some places in the old world, they consider their winery to be in balance. The flavor profile of what they get is what they want. And occasionally they rinse off with some cold water. And in the old school style of red wine, and if I were to go over to my family's home in Sicily and drink their red wine, to me, it tastes almost like vinegar. It tastes like every fault and flaw in the world. And to them, our wine tastes like Hawaiian punch because it's too fruity and too clean. Their wine has a lot of vinegar in it, has a lot of other things in it, but that's what they've grown up to like. So that's their appreciation and style of wine. And our style of wine here is very different. So every winery has to set up its own set of rules on how clean it needs to be. I definitely tend more towards the clean side. I think that it's a smart idea to keep your winery as clean as possible. It's also important when you're making a huge variety of wines that you're keeping things clean between different varieties of wine because they're all going to have different outcomes. If you're making one kind of wine, you might have a little bit more of a simple cleaning protocol. But the reality is, at the end of the day, is your level of risk acceptance is what drives the whole train. So if you want a dirty winery, you're going to have a higher risk of unwanted organisms. And if that's just the place you want to play, that's okay. But I will be willing to bet that as time goes on and as we start to have federal inspections pretty regularly in wineries, this isn't going to be okay. We're going to have to continue to clean up a little bit. We can't have these sort of chaotic, dirty wineries anymore. And then really clean wineries, you've got that lower risk of unwanted organisms. And that's the reality. At the end of the day, all we're trying to do is keep bad stuff from growing. And so every winery is going to have to set up its own set of protocols. And the reality is about clean is real. You can touch it, you can seal it, you can feel it. If you feel or smell something that's slimy, grimy, stinky, or hairy in your winery, you got to revise your cleaning protocols and clean. So, reality is cleaning is something that you can easily see, touch, and feel. And this is my barometer. My nose and my hands are my barometer for whether or not I will do business with another winery. If you walk in a winery and it smells like fingernail polish remover, it smells like airplane glue, bruised apples, rotten fruit, don't do business with them. If there's a bunch of fruit flies flying through the air, don't do business with them. That means they're not taking care of business. You need to have, because if they're not taking care of business, that means they're taking risks. Those risks will lead to possible infection by other microorganisms. And then when you bring those microorganisms to your winery, you may well infect your winery with a winery transmitted disease. That's a fact. And I've seen it happen a lot. I'll talk about some examples when we get to winery sanitation. So this is actually a winery in Tokai, Hungary. They like their mold. They like their must. They like the look of it. And that's a style of wine. Now, this is in Hungary. In Hungary, they do not have an FDA that's looking over their shoulder. If an FDA inspector walked in and saw this in your winery, you'd be in deep trouble. And then this is industrial clean, and this is what I call industrial clean. This is a winery that's using heavy industrial chemical. They're cleaning the tanks to a very sanitized degree, but they're also at the same time making sure that their wine environment is very clean as well. So they're definitely inoculating. They're using very aggressive types of yeast, nutrient, to make sure that their yeast get the best opportunity. And they're not concerning so much with absolute cleanliness on the outside, they're worried about the product on the inside. And the other thing I want to note about this picture is you notice the one that looks all, the tank that looks all rumpled. This is what happens if you don't take the lid off a tank before you pump it out and you implode a tank. And the way that you unimplode a tank is you clamp the top back on really hard, and then you compress the tank with air until it pops back out. The reason why I'm showing you this is that I have had about 5 students over the years be fired from jobs for doing this very thing. Make sure to vent the tank before you pump it out. That's all. Another lesson, another time. And then clean. This is in Germany. So this is spit polished, top of the line, absolutely clean. This is a functional winery, and this is what you want to look at if you want to have, the top-notch, ultra clean winery. And so this is what an FDA inspector would love to walk in and see, is that your winery is completely immaculately clean. So what do we do to clean? How do we clean? What kind of cleaners do we use? So I want to talk about some of the types of cleaners. I want to talk about water, which is really good. We need to have good, clean water. Whenever you're working in a winery, you've got to make sure that you've got a good, clean, potable water source. First and foremost, most important thing is having adequate, clean water. The other thing we have is anionic cleaners, or basic cleaners, cleaners that run on the high side of the pH scale, which means that they're very basic. Soda ash and sodium hydroxide, I want to talk about both of those. Then I want to talk about cationic cleaners, or acidic cleaners. And then also, how do we clean? What are the ways that we clean? So primarily, if you're going to start cleaning, the first thing we're going to do is rinse off whatever we're going to clean, whether it's a punch down tool, a hose, tank. We rinse it off first with that clean water, and then we apply a cleaner. And the cleaner that is the most potent, most commonly used in large wineries is called sodium hydroxide, also known as NaOH or caustic soda. It's a very effective cleaner. It removes tartrates, oils, and fat. If you get it on you, it will render your fat in your arm or your hand into soap. And so this is not something you want to get on you. If you do use sodium hydroxide, you're going to need to be wearing all sorts of personal protective equipment. You need to wear goggles. You'll need to wear gloves, because this will burn you. It'll burn you at high enough concentrations. The reason I say it's got a disadvantage is a high sodium content is that if you're on a well, or you're on a septic, or you're going to rewater your fields, there's a high amount of sodium, and that sodium will end up in the soil if you use it to water your vineyards, and that sodium can become an issue with vine health or any type of landscaping health. That sodium can be an issue later on. The other thing about sodium hydroxide, if you're going to clean with it, you've got to neutralize that basic cleaner, because wine's an acid. And so wine has a lot of acidity to it. You hear about people talk about how nice and acidic a wine is. The last thing you want to do is put a base in your wine and neutralize all that beautiful acidity. And then the other thing is that in high enough concentrations, this actually can have some sterilizing capacity as well. But sodium hydroxide is pretty much the king of cleaning. Another one that we use in small wineries, and this is one that we utilize at college cellars, is sodium carbonate. And the reason we use sodium carbonate, it's also a strong alkaline cleaner, but it's not as strong as sodium hydroxide. And so the reason why we like that is sodium hydroxide plus, students can create some issues. The last thing we need to do is burn a student or have a student have some sort of skin reaction. And so we tend to use sodium carbonate. Although it isn't as strong of a cleaner, we have pretty small equipment. So that means our equipment can be agitated and cleaned really easily, rather than using, we don't need as strong of a cleaner because we have plenty of hands to do the cleaning. So sodium carbonate may not be as strong of a cleaner, but it may require a little bit more manual scrubbing to get it done. We'll talk about that here in a moment. What are the necessary things to get things scrubbed up? Now, I want to talk about that acidic rinse. So your primary cleaners being sodium hydroxide and sodium carbonate, they require an acid rinse. So what do we rinse with? The recommendations are either tartaric acid, which sometimes is combined with sulfur dioxide, to do that acidic rinse. Some wineries like to add the SO2 piece. I'm not sure it's really necessary because it smells really bad. It causes you to breathe it and cough, but it's been an old school way of doing things. It's how I was trained initially, is some sort of an acid rinse with SO2 in it. And the reason we do that is because the SO2, I think, in people's minds is to be an antimicrobial. I'm not sure it really works particularly well as a rinse agent, but if it makes wineries feel good, fine. The other rinse agent we use sometimes is acetic acid, and sometimes that acetic acid is combined with hydrogen peroxide as a sanitizer in order to do that rinse to neutralize the basic wash. And this is something that's pretty typically used. We kind of have a 1, 2, 3 punch. You know, you rinse with water, you do a cleaner, and then you rinse with an acidic rinse, then you rinse with water again. These are that neutralization step before that we add wine or we contact anything with wine. And sometimes I want to talk about citric acid because this is pretty common in the wine industry. And citric acid is not a cleaner. It's commonly used in wineries. Again, it's that idea of an acid rinse. And the reason people use citric acid is it's really, 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 really cheap. And it's a really cheap way to rinse off that basic cleaner. And I was raised on this. I was taught to use citric acid and SO2. So we would do a basic wash, then we would rinse off with citric acid and SO2. I was taught this. It is still being used in wineries, and we need to stop. And the reason we need to stop using it is that citric acid is food for literally everything. If you want to go pause this video for a moment and look up something called the Krebs cycle, Krebs cycle, or also known as the citric acid cycle, every microorganism on Earth likes citric acid. You like citric acid. I like citric acid. It's tasty. Makes great orange juice, lemon juice. I mean, could you imagine a gin and tonic without some lime in it? Would be tragic. But the fact of the matter is that everything utilizes this. And early in my days in college cellars, we did the citric and SO2 rinse because that was the standard in the industry at the time until we sort of learned not to. And always we fought these black slime molds all over the place. We had a lot of background issues. And as soon as we stopped using citric acid, we moved to tartaric acid first and then eventually acetic acid. And the reason why we use tartaric acid and acetic acid is both of those acids are known what's called as end line metabolites. Nothing else eats them. Nothing likes them. Nothing consumes them. Nothing enjoys them. So because of that, nothing lives on those two acids. So we need to kind of get citric acid out of our wineries and start using something instead. And for me, the big game changer a few years ago was peracetic acid or peroxyacetic acid. And I'm going to talk about that and we get into sanitizers because not only do we get that acidic rinse, there's the hydrogen peroxide in there that acts as a sanitizer. Again, when we get to sanitation, we'll talk about that. But citric acid needs to go away. And so hopefully this little talk will help you to convince some of your winery owners otherwise that they maybe should be moving on from using citric. So here's the general winery cleaning regime. And if you've ever worked in a restaurant, you always know about the triple dish sink. And so basically we have our wash bin one, which is our cleaner. It's basically more or less our soap that's going to wash down. It's going to get rid of the food. It's going to neutralize the food. Usually we have sodium hydroxide or sodium carbonate. Then in our second bin, we do a water rinse. So we wash off and get rid of that basic cleaner. And then we go to the acidic rinse, which is either acetic acid or tartaric acid. Then we go back to that wash bin of water again, and then we have a clean implement. So that's generally the way that we go. So water, wash bin 1, wash bin 2, wash bin 3, back to wash bin 2, and then you're ready to go. Now I want to talk about another thing that you can add to your cleaning protocol. Now again, that standard, I would say, cleaning protocol is the basic followed by the acidic rinse, then a rinse off. But there is another thing you can include, which I thought was really interesting, and this is something that I've kind of moved into the last couple of years. It's something called star sand. It was used in breweries, but it was something that was taught to me. And what's really cool about it is that it's a mixture of all these different acids, usually sulfuric acid or sulfurous acid and phosphoric acid. And what's great about these is they're super low pH, which means nothing likes to grow in them. They foam a little bit, and you can spray it on with like a little spray tank. And what it does is it foams up, and then it rinses down, and it rinses off all of the buildup from, if you have particularly well water where you've got hard water, where you've got a lot of minerals and things like that, it eats all of that off. It also eats off biofilms, and it's a great thing to add to your cleaning protocol. So say that you're going to go home on Fridays, you're going to go home over the weekend. Before you go home over the weekend, spray everything down with star sand or something like that. You'll find that the winery just gets this extra gleam, this extra cleanliness to it. And it's something that I've really, really enjoyed adding to our cleaning protocol. It's just this sort of one additional piece. And the reason why we want to add that one additional piece is that it creates a unique environment that is different. So every time we're using the same cleaning chemicals over and over again, we're going to eventually develop some, resistance to those chemicals. So adding another, you know, ingredient to this is going to create that place where it's harder for microbes to adapt. And this is just one extra thing that you can add to really create an extra step for real winery cleanliness. I want to talk about winery and cleaning equipment, and this is kind of that idea of personal protective equipment. You're going to need safety goggles and gloves. But the other things I want to talk about are really what the purposes are of cleaning. So when we get down to cleaning, there's a few things that are really important as to how we need to clean. So let's talk about the important pieces of the mechanics of cleaning. Now that we've talked about the cleaners, let's talk about the mechanics of cleaning. So our keys to effective cleaning are contact time. How long do you need to have a chemical contact your tank, your pump, your hoses, whatever it is? And every cleaning chemical you buy will probably have this on the label, but generally it's a few minutes at least. You might need to do more depending on how dirty the tank is. The other thing that we're going to have is some effective chemical concentration. How much? And again, read the label. Every cleaning chemical will have a concentration on the label that you should use. And then again, the temperature of the cleaner. The hotter that cleaner is, the greater of effectiveness to a degree. And why I say 2 degrees, once we get above about 180 degrees Fahrenheit, we get so hot that we can cook things to the tank. So generally 150-ish degrees in temperature is really, really hot. You're going to be able to clean things really well, 130 to 150. And your likelihood of getting severely burned isn't too bad. But that higher temperature cleaner is really important. And then we have mechanical action. Now, if you're a person, you can get in a tank and scrub it. Just get in and scrub it down. You can scrub down your harvest bins. You can get a brush or a broom and scrub them down really, really good. But that works in small wineries. What do you do when you get into giant wineries? Well, in giant wineries, they have what's called clean in place systems. I'll talk about CIPs in a second. But they're just a high pressure sprayer that rotates inside of a 100-foot tall tank. Because unlike our illustration here, where we've got a guy sitting on a rope with personal protective equipment on with a broom in a 100-foot tall tank with some containers of cleaner, if you actually did that in a, say, million-liter or million-gallon tank like at Gallo, it would take you a week to clean the tank out. Whereas having a proper clean in place system, that process can be done in an hour or so. So having the right equipment is really important. And that's that high pressure spray, that mechanical agitation piece that's important. And I want to also continue that mechanical agitation piece to when you're cleaning out your pumps and your hoses. When you're cleaning out a pump and a hose in a winery, you have to get the speed of the pump up enough so that the hoses shake a little bit. And you'll see what I mean when you're pumping over. You want to get those hoses to shake a little bit, because when those hoses are actually shaking a bit, that means the liquid is moving fast enough through the hose to create what's called turbulent flow. And that turbulent flow is the water swirling in a way that helps to scrape the edges of the hose itself, and that helps to clean things. So really important to have that high speed when you're cleaning out a pump. It's not just a matter of draining a little bit of cleaner through a hose. You've got to actually move it at a high enough speed to shake those particles loose. And that's that agitation piece that's so important when cleaning pumps. All right, cleaning routine basics. First thing, rinse it off. Then you add your detergent and your scrub, you clean it in place, you rinse it, then you neutralize that detergent, you rinse if you need it, and then finally you visually inspect it. So here you are looking inside of the door of a press. You're looking for any detritus, you're looking for biofilms, you're looking for anything else besides that. So that's the important piece, is that visual inspection for cleanliness. Clean in place is also important. This is the systems that you can buy that will clean a tank for you based on a timer. You can use hotter water, you can use stronger chemicals because you don't have humans involved that can get burned. They can be faster, they're programmable, they're really pricey. They can be $5, $10, $15, $20,000. So this may not be something that's in every winery's budget. Whereas having people climb in a tank to clean it is could be less expensive. But at the end of the day is, even if you have these beautiful CIP systems, you've got to inspect the tank, or you've got to inspect whatever it is you're cleaning, because sometimes they break. And if they're not turning, they're not washing properly, the tank itself isn't getting cleaned. So it's important for you to still do that visual inspection. And again, with any piece of equipment, it's only as good as the operator using it. So it could be the best piece of equipment in the world, but if it's not used properly, it doesn't matter. And then clean in place manual. The advantage is, you get to do the visual check on the spot. There's no equipment. Small wineries do this a lot. It's just a matter of you getting in and doing it. The disadvantage is there's human error. You don't always have the best employees doing the best things, so you've got to train them properly. If you have big equipment, it's really hard for little hands to do that job. It can be slow, and then having people get into tanks after ferment is really, really dangerous. So even though you're using sanitizers and everything else like that, and you're opening those tanks and venting them, I've been every year, if you look it up, probably Google it right now, winemaker dies CO2. I bet you'll find some where carbon dioxide asphyxiated somebody from climbing in a tank. So, we've got that liability issue of people getting sick potentially from going into confined spaces. And then we also have the increased liability of people getting, chemical burns if they're not mixing things properly, which is why it's so important to have some sort of cleaning protocols in place. And lastly, I show these dirty hands because, it's a badge of honor once upon a time in winemakers to come home with the dirtiest, purplest, wine stained hands that you could. And I would tend to think in the current environment, maybe that's not the best thing. We probably want to be paying a little bit more attention and washing our hands a little bit more. And lastly, elbow grease. Just do it. Just clean your winery. Regular maintenance is the most important piece. Just get up every day with the idea that you're going to have a clean winery in your mind. Use your eyes, look for hot spots in the drains, especially in valves and fittings, and then barrels are a complete disaster. Just trying to keep them clean. And the reason I've taken these pictures here in particular is that if you look at the top one on the left-hand side, there's a little gasket up there. And the reason why I'm showing you this is a winery that failed to clean. And they had a bottling line that they sterilized with steam. But the one thing they did is that little gasket at the top is the gasket that sealed the top of the bottle. And why this is important is I got a call as a consultant to come into this winery to solve why their winery had one bottle in every case re-fermenting. And I said, you know what? I think I know why that is. And they came back at me and said, well, why do you think that is? I said, well, you've got a 12 head filler, don't you, on your bottling line? They said, yes, we do. How did you know? And I said, let's go back and take a look. And sure enough, 11 of the heads had perfect gaskets. But one of them looked like this. It had been damaged. It had obviously been on the floor, run over a few times, and then put back on the bottling line and wasn't getting cleaned. And even though there was steam going by it, there was all these cracks and insulated places for little bugs to hide. And when they were bottling their sweet Riesling, that gasket dosed every single bottle with 1 or 2 yeast cells. And that's all it took for a re-fermentation to happen in every case. Now, this is a winery that sent out about 10,000 cases of Riesling all over. And they had to recall 10,000 cases of wine, all because they didn't clean one gasket. They lost a lot of money, they lost a lot of reputation, and they lost a lot of market share because they simply didn't clean one thing. So this can be really expensive if you don't pay attention. And finally, some references for y'all if you want to look up a little bit more. And the reason I've got the one for lung cancer there is really we don't want to talk about people using sulfur dioxide in the cellar all that much. It's not something we should use too frequently as a cleaner. That's why peracetic acid is just so much better. There you go. And we'll talk a little bit more in part 2.